to Resident Skeptics. I am your host, Jordan, with my least favorite host. Just kidding.
No, it's probably true. I think that's accurate.
No, here's how it is.
I can take it.
I like you, Connor, and Isaiah for different reasons, depending on the topic. So this is a fun one to do with you, though, because we went to go see the movie together. We're doing a movie review, Steven and I, of a big blockbuster hit called Dune Part Two. Made $83 million its opening weekend, so it made a lot. And it seems like it's well loved by pretty much everyone, but we're going to take our stab at it, and Steven is going to start us off.
Yep, and we'll start by just kind of giving our initial impressions and just an overall kind of scoring, I guess, without getting into spoilers, and then we might talk specifics of the story and go into detail about the things specifically we really liked or didn't like about the movie, because like anything, it's not perfect. There's a few gripes we have with it, but much like the first Dune movie, I think, like Jordan said, very well received. Everyone that I know has seen it, or the reviews that I've seen out there have all been very positive with it. And for me personally, it's been a very enjoyable sci-fi, I guess, sequels to watch.
Yeah, and without giving too much away, like the main plot of it is about a guy named Paul Atreides, who is supposed to be this messianic figure that saves the planet Arrakis. That is like the very, very blunt version, and it has there's a lot of politics. There's some pretty good fighting. It moves. It's a lot different than what we've had with Marvel. Because Marvel, I mean, that's been going on for at least, decade and a half at this point, and people are getting really tired of it because
I think we're getting a fatigue of Marvel, especially on the quality that's been released since the Avengers ended.
Yeah, and Dune is a little bit slower. It's a bit more about character development. It's such a different pace for a viewer compared to Marvel that I think it's actually refreshing. But you go ahead, take it away, Steven, your initial thoughts.
Okay, so again, never read the books or anything, so watching Part 1 and Part 2 were fresh for me. I will say I do really enjoy, and I really specifically enjoyed Part 2 as well. Overall, like Jordan said, it's kind of slow, but it never really feels that slowness, maybe a little bit, but overall it keeps your attention, it keeps you engaged, you get very invested into the characters. I think Timothy Chalamet, I think he does a great job in his portrayal of Paul. I think the main criticism that people will say about him is just his stature. He's he is skinny.
Yeah, he's a small guy.
Yeah, he's a small guy. So he's not necessarily, just from an appearance standpoint, gonna portray like a savior-like character, a great warrior style character. But his acting is top notch, though, on point, and he makes you believe in that character, I think, through his performance. And this movie is loaded with kind of top stars too, and they all do a great performance, I think.
I think that overall it was well casted. It was well casted. My least favorite, the least favorite that I can say to not spoil it, because we're getting into spoilers after this quick little bit, is probably Zendaya. I don't think she's a tremendously great actress. I think they could have picked someone better for the role. I was not impressed with her performance.
See, that's where I differ. I thought it was great. It's not going to be any Academy Awards, but I thought she played the character, how it was written, very well and believable. So again, I had no issues with any of the performances from the actors across the board.
Yeah,
I think
it was
everyone
my least
did
favorite,
great.
though.
Yeah.
She was my least favorite performance.
Okay.
And I think everyone else did pretty good. I mean, I'm trying to think of probably who my favorite performance, probably Rebecca Ferguson. I just think she's just a tremendous actress in the first place, so that went well for her. Well, we won't get into that yet. But yeah, so I think it was well casted overall. The visuals, again, it was beautiful. It was just gorgeous.
Yeah. And that's something like even just the world building is really fascinating. If you are a sci-fi fan at all, definitely worth a watch. Go watch part 1 if you haven't first, and then definitely go see part 2. Just the world building, you get invested and interested in all the different organizations and stuff at play, even the ones kind of behind the scenes.
It's
their
the
motives.
politics. Yeah, that's what's really cool. That's what's really cool about it.
But then also the action scenes, top notch as well. When there's combat with various vehicles, and then also the actual like hand-to-hand combat, I think is choreographed really well. Even the kind of final climactic fight for part 2, I usually can predict movies pretty well how they're going to end, and I was still kind of like, I don't know who's going to win this fight necessarily. So that was a good change of pace.
Yeah, no, that was cool. I was kind of on the edge of my seat as well. I will say that this is a big screen movie. I think it is worth going to see it on the big screen. I think the big filter with the first Dune was that they didn't put it on the big screen just because of COVID and all that jazz. But it did I think it's a movie that's well worth the money. I mean, it's almost 3 hours long. There's so much really well done CGI. There's, again, a lot of world building that is worth seeing on the big screen. So I've definitely recommend it. If you haven't seen it yet, go see it. I think it is worth it. Now, spoilers.
Spoilers. Where to even start on this?
Okay, let's actually start with the things that we really liked in detail. I'll go first. I'll volunteer myself.
Sure.
I'll go first.
Ladies first. I'll allow it.
Okay, thanks. So what I really liked about it, I think that there was really good, overall, good development with the characters. I felt like the pace was pretty good overall. Now, again, I haven't read the books, but you kind of said they kind of do a pretty good job fitting in a lot in a really short amount of time, even though 3 hours isn't a super long time. So I think overall the movie is beautiful. All the things that we've already talked about in the non-spoiler part of our review.
Yeah, exactly. And could there have been maybe slight cuts to scenes that were a little bit slower to fit in some additional stuff? Probably, sure. But again, I don't know the specifics of that. But everyone that I've spoken to that have previously read the books have all said that they've done a really good job at being faithful to the source content and almost fitting in really everything that's portrayed in the books.
Yeah, one thing that's obviously not portrayed in the books is the music. So Hans Zimmer does the score for it, and I think that his style with it fit the movie very, very well.
I didn't realize how much music actually makes me like a movie until this and a few others. Because I think Hans Zimmer also did Interstellar, which also has, I think, some pretty good scores in that.
Well, he scored so much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I felt like it moved fast enough in some areas, but I did feel like there was good surprises there too, especially as someone who hasn't read the books. The main baddie, and I don't know if I'm gonna. It's like Freya Baron. It's Austin Butler's character. The bald,
right. Yeah, I don't know the character's name.
The psychotic bald guy.
Yeah, he's a Harkonnen. He's the another nephew of the Baron, essentially.
Yes. And so this is the person that the Bene Gesserit think, oh, okay, we can maybe have him as our Messiah, because that's part of what the Bene Gesserit does. They're a sisterhood. They're an order that uses mysticism and their political influence to kind of move key players. And that's the part that I did really like about the film, is that the film felt very gender specific. With how women wield power, the Bene Gesserit, I think, very much describes how women wield power. They're very behind the scenes. They're pulling the strings. I really liked that because that really plays on the evil power of women and what they're capable of.
Outsmarting man.
Some of the, I mean, they're a whole sisterhood that is able to politically move these men. And so I liked that was very gender specific.
Well, and they literally have some type of kind of psychological powers where they have what they call the voice, which if spoken correctly will manipulate people into doing what they command. Almost like Star Wars, where you have the Force to use manipulation, similar concept. So
yeah, no, and that's too, I feel like almost is that nod to, again, this manipulative power that women have if they can wield it a certain way. Then I also think it played very specifically into what men are supposed to be, where Paul, is the Messiah, and then you have the very brutal, the Harkonnens, like, again, these really real fighters. But that doesn't mean that women can't fight too. Like, I felt like there's realistic fight scenes for the women.
A few fighters, like most of the fighters for all the militaries, for all the political entities, they're all males, except for the Fremen, I think, have a few fighters like Paul's love interest. Shawnee. Okay. I kept hearing Johnny throughout the movie.
It's Shawnee, though.
Shawnee. Okay, so she is a warrior. She fights, and but it's believable too, because the way the Fremen fight too is more finesse style. It's not like an overpowering with just brute force.
It's strategy.
Right, and they fight with Dune. If you're unfamiliar, pretty much everyone has like these personal shields. So most like guns and weaponry like that are going to be ineffective. So all the combat when it comes to personnel, like infantry, is going to be really hand to hand with knives. And so you don't have to necessarily rely on strength for that. A lot of it is just technique and movement and your just overall skill. So it's more believable that for the warriors who are women, because that's one thing that is annoying in movies where you see women, they'll like hit a man one punch and knock him clean out.
He's out. Yeah, well, there's the scene in the very beginning of the movie where Lady Jessica saves Paul from a Harkonnen that's from behind, and she just like takes this giant rock and just starts bashing, and she just goes crazy. Like, that's what a woman would do. Like, we got to make sure this guy is dead and just hammer him, and that's what she did. And so I felt like it was realistic, which I appreciate. I appreciate that it was gender specific. Another element that I think is probably the most noticeable on a messaging scale that I wouldn't say for any other real mainstream movie that I can think of in the past decade is that there was actually an incredibly strong pro-life message. I don't feel like I have to contrive that message out of this movie. Like, it was so evident to me. In the very beginning of the film, Lady Jessica, she kills the Harkonnen, and remember, she's pregnant. She's pregnant with her daughter from Leto, and she comes down, and Paul is like, is she okay? And Jessica's like, oh, she's fine. They talk about the unborn baby as if she's a living person. So that to me was like very significant, because people don't talk about babies like that. Even when we're more pro-life, so to speak, we'll say, oh, it's doing good, but they spoke about her as if she was already just around. So that was cool. The second thing too is in the movie, and again, major spoilers. Yep.
So definitely, if you're interested, go see the movie, come back and watch the rest of this.
Pause, watch the movie, come back. Lady Jessica becomes the Reverend Mother for the Fremen, and she ends up being able to speak to her daughter in the womb. And what they do with the visuals, this is partly what makes the visuals so good, is that they show the daughter in the womb developing. Like, it starts off, it's like kind of almost looks like shrimp babies, like a little freaky, and granted, Lady Jessica's relationship with her daughter is kind of creepy too, because she like has these full conversations, but she shows her talking to her child in the womb, and they show the baby like developing and just kind of like hearing things. It was so cool to see. It was so cool. And like, that's not even me trying to like just pull a pro-life message where there is none. I'm like, that's pretty strongly pro-life, to basically say this is a baby that's in here and I can talk to it.
I mean, and the fact that it had the voice is indication of the significance of life.
Yeah, that and there's kind of a parallel with it to even babies being alive in the womb. Like moms, they feel like the baby kicking in there. It's moving around. Sometimes it moves around being breech, but it's moving around. There's a study by the Charlotte Lozier that talks about how a baby recognizes its mother's voice in the womb. Sadly, it does not recognize the father's voice, but it recognizes the woman's voice, which makes sense. And so there's kind of that comparison there between these full adult conversations that Lady Jessica is having with her daughter in the womb, it was kind of creepy. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, that happened too because in order for her to be the Reverend Mother for the Fremen, she had to drink what they call the water of life, which is essentially
worm
poison from the sandworms that they draw out. And it's typically kills pretty much anybody. Only specific people really are allowed live, and then they become Reverend Mother. And because Jessica is Bene Gesserit, or
Bene
Gesserit, she's able to kind of withstand the effects of the poison. But they gave it to her not knowing she was pregnant, and so the poison then affected the her daughter.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how they start the ability to communicate, literally the daughter communicating with her mom. So it's not just the mom kind of talking to the daughter there in the womb, but
yeah. No,
that's how, so like the first, talking again about the stories, so it picks up right where obviously part one left off. So Paul and Jessica, they joined a little group of the Fremen, and they're going to the main section. And the first third of the movie is probably Paul kind of being initiated into the Fremen and almost becoming a Fremen himself, because he's not initially accepted by everybody.
Yeah, and Stilgar, he believes that Paul is the Messiah, and the rest of the Fremen don't, because they want it to be someone who is actually Fremen. He gets that initiation, and he ends up riding the grandfather sandworm, and fulfilling prophecy. And now the Fremen are just all about him, and they're like, this guy is definitely the Messiah. Paul is very reluctant in this, and I'm trying to remember what exactly changed his mind, but they needed to go to the south for some reason, but he didn't want to go because there was the prophecy about if he went south, there would be just millions upon millions of dead bodies because of his choice to do that. But his mother encourages him to drink the poison of the sandworm, and that opens his mind. And that's kind of how Lady Jessica's character changes, because the poison opens her mind to the future.
Yeah, and Paul, after he drinks, he immediately changes too, which we'll get in. I think that's partly both of some of ours kind of negatives, but
yeah, which I think we can probably move into some of the negative at this point.
Yeah, but I wanted to just add that also a theme with the movie is that mindset of kind of power and having too much power, because Paul is, like you said, fighting that the prophecy himself. Like, he doesn't necessarily believe it, and he doesn't want to go south, because you have like the north side who don't believe necessarily in the prophecy, and then the Fremen in the south mostly do believe. And a lot of that comes from the Bene Gesserit, who kind of propagandized the message of the prophecy and of the Messiah. And so Paul doesn't want the power, essentially. So he's fighting that aspect for power. He doesn't want to be the ruler. And so he almost just wants to keep fighting with the Fremen, taking out the spice harvesters of the Harkonnens.
It brings in an interesting question of when is it time to wield power? Is power on its own something that you shouldn't wield? You know, that's an important question, because
it was almost like he was fighting his own change and ascendancy to the prophecy himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we have to ask ourselves too, like, is power on its own like inherently bad, or can you use power for good without being sucked in by it? And I think that was what Shawnee kind of was a little bit afraid of, is that, you know, because Shawnee and Paul, they fall in love and all this stuff, and she doesn't want him to take on this power, and he promises that he won't, but he ends up, you know, seeing the future, and he decides to take up this mantle, and he basically puts this could be argued whether or not what he did was virtuous. You know, push Shawnee aside for the betterment of the planet, or should he have stayed with her and, you know, stayed true to that love and then let whatever happen over there. I personally think he probably did the harder thing, which is giving that up, like even being willing to marry the emperor's daughter, to save an entire people group that had been, you know, persecuted and stomped on. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. Well, so that's kind of partly one of my negatives, where he was fighting this instinct the entire movie, and then he's deciding whether or not to go south. And I think, if I remember, Shawnee wants him to go south, and then he finally agrees to go. But anyways, he goes south, they ride the sandworms, and that's negative number one, is all of a sudden they're riding sandworms, where in the first movie, sandworms are made out to be such violent creatures that you just avoid at all costs. But now the Fremen can pretty much ride them at will. And
now they're like taking out ships. And
so the sandworms are essentially like tamed by the Fremen. It's pretty cool, but it's very contrast to how the first movie was. But anyway, so Paul goes south, and then he finally decides reluctantly to go south, and then like the very next scene, he drank the poison, and it's so fast. And then as soon as he wakes up from drinking the poison, he immediately puts on the Messiah persona and is completely different with that, like speaks in front of all the masses of Fremen, pretty much saying like, I am the Messiah. Like it's very good job acting, but total change 180 in how his character was before. And the scenes just happened so fast. And I think that's partly because of trying to fit in so much content, but that was kind of part of my gripe. It was a little bit of the pacing and the quickness into that change.
Yeah, I feel like they could have cut out some stuff in the beginning to make room for him changing that much, because guys, it literally was like a second, and then suddenly when Lady Jessica is like, make sure you save some of the poison for a man, you know, literally like 2 minutes later, he's like, okay, I gotta go. And then suddenly he's there, and he's like across the country.
I don't even think it shows him drinking it. He's just already drunk it, and then he's like fighting the poison, and he's like, his vital signs are so low, they think he might die. And Shawnee comes and mixes a tear with the poison to save him.
Prophecy,
something like that, which that was a little confusing. Some of the stuff you just kind of have to go with it. You shut off your brain a little bit.
I think some of it too is that you can't fit all of it.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was in the book, but you can't explain all of it in that scene. But yeah, I agree with that. I thought the pacing was overall good, but that was the one part where I was like, we needed more time to really take in the change that had happened. I did feel like the final scene where the Emperor comes and they're able to take over the ship really easily, I was almost sitting there thinking, what's the catch? Because it was so easy. I was like, what's the catch?
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that I did not particularly like, while I think he did a fine job, Christopher Walken. He just reminded me of Joe Biden. Like, because when you see the first movie, you're like, he's this ominous emperor that is politically controlling everything. And he's the one that allowed the Harkonnens to take out the House of Atreides because they were getting too strong. And so then you make it to part two. You're like, oh, finally, we're going to see who the emperor is.
You think in your mind you have this menacing figure,
a little more mysterious, like calculating, and then you get Christopher Walken,
and he appears kind of very
suit.
Yeah, he appears very weakish.
He does.
Not the most intelligent. He might be more. Again, not the actor himself, but the character.
Yeah,
doesn't appear all super intelligent. Most of, I think, his advice is coming from the Bene Gesserits and the advisor, and from his daughter as well, who's being trained as a Bene Gesserit. And so, yeah, it was completely off of what I envisioned the Emperor to be. So that was kind of a letdown.
Yeah, it was a letdown. I didn't feel like... I'm sure Christopher Walken, he did a fine job, I guess. because
No, we're strictly talking the character.
yeah, no, I understand. Yeah. I understand. What I'm trying to say is that I think he did a fine job for whatever he was directed to do. But I didn't feel like the character was very strong or powerful. Yeah. I felt like it was a letdown. It felt anticlimactic. I will say too, for Freya Baron, I don't know if that's fully how you say it, but this is Austin Butler's character. I really felt like he had not lost the Elvis accent. I gotta be honest. He sounded like a Hispanic Elvis, where like he kept going back and forth, and I
didn't catch that as much, because I just thought that's how a lot of the Harkonnens spoke. They kind of spoke a little differently than normal English.
Who's the guy that played the other nephew of
Bautista?
Dave Bautista. Yeah. He sounded like himself.
Maybe
for
he
the
couldn't
most
do
part.
an accent at all, but there were other characters.
And there's Skarsgård too. The main Baron, like
he's just got a unique voice altogether.
Well, yeah, and then you get Freya Baron, and he sounds like this Hispanic Elvis. So it's just like, and I was like, what's happening here? Like,
I did like his character though.
I would have liked his character if I wasn't so distracted by the fact that he sounded like a Hispanic Elvis.
But that brings me to, I have 3 kind of quick negatives to go on.
Okay.
Overall, again, praise the movie, loved it. But number 1, going back to Freya Baron, they had this whole kind of probably 10-minute or so sequence of kind of introducing him, and it was even shot on the planet of Harkonnen itself, which had a whole cool palette to it. Mm-hmm. But they introduce this new character, and typically in movies when they do that, you're like, okay, this character is going to be like in it for a while, and spoiler, he later does die, probably an hour later or so in the final. So it was kind of like, he got introduced and then it was just gone.
Yeah, kind of wanted more
in a way. But then other negative was the Fremen in the north, when they were fighting the Harkonnens, taking out the spice harvesters and just kind of doing almost like you could call it guerrilla warfare. Mm-hmm. Every scene was pretty much, they were easily destroying this stuff. And they had like crazy weaponry, like some laser beam stuff. And so the thought was, why did they wait so long to do this? Like, why did it take Paul coming in order for them to start rebelling against the Harkonnen? If they had this type of, because every fight was pretty much like one-sided. The Fremen were easily taking out like these machines. And then that kind of correlates into the next point, which the final climactic battle where you had the Emperor come to Arrakis and he had all of his army, plus you had the Harkonnens, and they're like in this meeting, and then their armies are outside, and then the Fremen come in with like several sandworms, and just first they had like these nukes, and so they nuke pretty much all the heavy all the heavy weaponry, and then the sandworms decimate the majority of the infantry, and then the rest of the Fremen, who outnumbered all the other people by a large amount, easily took out the Emperor's army and all the Harkonnens. It wasn't even a contest. Yeah. And so it was kind of like an anticlimactic final battle in that scene.
Yeah.
Outside of the one-on-one fight with Paul and Freya Baron. That was a good fight scene, because it was kind of one of those, Paul spoke to the Emperor and was like, hey, name your champion, I'll fight, and if I win, I become the next emperor. And so then Freya Baron was the Emperor's champion, and they had a whole duel. And Paul actually gets stabbed first, and so
you kind of think that he's gonna actually not win.
Yeah, but he does eventually pull it out. I did really like that fight, though. I just thought it was well choreographed and very believable.
Yeah, no, I thought it was too. I mean, again, overall is a good movie, but those were, I think, some legitimate plot holes in the movie that I hope there's a Dune 3. I know the director definitely wanted to do 3. There hasn't been an official announcement, and I would like it too, because that's another praise, though. So in a weird instance, you get a nice resolution for kind of the initial plot of because
Dune
part one really did not give that to you.
Well, no one expected that. You did expect the continuation for part 2.
You did, but it really did just feel like it ended in the middle of the movie.
Well, that was the intention.
I think it was a bad intention.
Well, when you have already designated multiple parts, I don't know any other way to do it.
No, I feel like there's a way it could have ended it.
Anyways,
some sort of
so this one, you get a good resolution with the plot of kind of Paul, the Emperor, and the Harkonnens, because the Harkonnens, all the key figures get eliminated.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get a nice resolution there, but they leave it up for
the other houses.
A third one where the other houses, which I don't even know those names, but they did not accept Paul's ascendancy to the Emperor. And then you even have Jessica as kind of one of the last scenes being like, oh, the Holy War is about to begin. So now it's setting up to have Paul and the Fremen fighting the other houses in like some holy war, as Paul again represents the Messiah. And then you have the other houses that I guess will be combating that. Yeah. So yeah. Sounds really good. Would love to see that movie. Hopefully it does get made.
Yeah, I mean, with how well this one is doing, I'd be surprised if it didn't. But yeah, let us know if you thought that our review was accurate, anything that we missed, anything that you liked that we disliked.
Too
let
much
us
to
know.
go over in one review.
Yeah. Let me know if you think Austin Butler sounded like a Hispanic Elvis. I would be curious. I think that's it.
I think so too. Go see the movie. It's really good.
Yeah, go see the movie. Make sure that you subscribe to our channel. We have some really fun stuff coming up, including White History Month. With no other than our half black co-host, Isaiah, and then we're gonna be having a little surprise with the boys. So you're not gonna want to miss out on that. It should be funny and mildly entertaining.